Hello and welcome to June's Bookorama. I'm June Thomas. Today I'm standing up, not quite sure what to do with my hands or the rest of my body, but we'll give it a shot. I know it's already mid-November as I'm filming this, but today I'm going to talk about the books I read in October 2024. I read 8 books, 5 novels, and 3 works of non-fiction. That is a reversal of my usual pattern. Typically, I read more non-fiction than fiction, but October was a little bit special in all kinds of ways. I should say first that I don't have copies of all the books that I read. I typically do the majority of my reading for pleasure, which is to say, not research reading, where I might just be dipping into books or looking at articles, but just reading for fun. I do that via audiobooks. And what's more, I get the bulk of them from Libby, the free service provided by many public libraries, which means that I return them as soon as I'm done, so I don't have anything to hold up for you for some of them. This month, though, I read more physical books than usual, and I now have physical copies of a couple of the books that I first read as audiobooks because I bought copies to give to friends as gifts. A surprisingly, to me at least, high number of the books that I read in October were what I would consider outstanding. So I'll talk about those in a moment, but first let me kind of go through the others. I read the Queer Arab Glossary so that I could interview editor Marwan Kaabour for the Outward podcast. It's a Slate podcast. It's a really interesting book. It's beautifully laid out and it gathers words and terms used by, for, and about gay culture in the 6 main dialects of the Arabic language. That is Levantine, Iraqi, Gulf, Egyptian, Sudanese, and Maghrebi dialects. I was Slate's foreign editor for many years, and I know from experience that every time, almost, I would publish a piece that referred in some way to the existence of gay people in the Middle East, some commentators would almost challenge the existence of gay culture in Muslim societies. This book, which to be clear is focused on the Arabic linguistic diaspora rather than religious identity, is such an effective counter to that position. The words collected in this book and the history behind them are evidence of both queer culture and homophobia in the Arabic-speaking world, and the book is a very effective kind of testimony to both of those things. Marwan is a great talker. It's a fascinating topic, so I'll put a link to the Outward episode where I chatted with him in the YouTube description. I have to admit, I was a bit disappointed by The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. I really enjoyed their books One Last Stop and, of course, Red, White and Royal Blue, so much better than the movie. And while this book is as well written as McQuiston's other books, the subject matter didn't really grab me. It's about that most classic of queer topics, a couple that broke up some years ago and is now on the verge, maybe, of getting back together. They meet up unexpectedly on an absolutely top-of-the-line food and wine tour of Europe, which provides a lot of opportunities for detailed descriptions of food, wine, and shagging. And I think that every time I've read one of McQuiston's books, I've thought that it was about twice as long as it needed to be. Even when I was enjoying it, I just wondered why the characters, who are supposed to be smart, hadn't figured something out that I had been aware of since about page 20. That was definitely the case in this one. So nicely written, but with annoying characters who really should not get back together, and a setting that even I, a very bougie European, found rather grating. I listened to this one, and I have to note that the audiobook, which was narrated by Emma Galvin and Max Myers, was really well done. I also read Wild, The Life of Peter Beard, a hagiographic biography of the artist and traveller written by Graham Boynton. The second half of the book's subtitle, Photographer, Adventurer, Lover, says quite a lot about Beard. I confess I didn't know anything about him before I read the book. I chose it because I really like biographies, especially of artists. And while I enjoyed it, because Beard certainly had an interesting life, I just didn't share the author's sympathies. Boynton was a longtime friend of Beard's, and even knowing nothing about the guy, I could tell that Beard was getting what reality TV viewers would call the hero edit. Boynton kept saying how handsome and charming Beard was, and while he certainly was handsome, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have found him charming, and I'm also pretty sure he wouldn't have made not the slightest effort to charm someone like me. The last I liked it but book of the month was Orbital. This is the first one I can actually hold up, by Samantha Harvey, which of course just won the Booker Prize. It's about the lives of 6 people, 4 astronauts, 2 cosmonauts aboard the International Space Station, circling the Earth, seeing its beauty, witnessing the path of a destructive typhoon, doing their work, thinking their thoughts. It's a very interior book. Harvey takes us inside their shells, so to speak. I bought 5 of the 6 Booker nominees. I kind of wanted to read more contemporary fiction. I've only read 2 of them so far, and if I hadn't made that kind of casual intention to read the nominees, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have read this book. And if the train I was riding on hadn't experienced a delay, I'm not sure I would have finished it, but I'm really glad I did. Some of the small scenes, the thoughts that pass through the characters' minds, the realizations of desire or lack of desire have really stuck with me. And weirdly, though this was far from my favorite book this month, it's one that I can see myself rereading at some point down the road. Okay, that leaves 4 books that I really loved. The first was The Editor: How Publishing Legend Judith James Shaped Culture in America, by Sara B. Franklin. So, Judith James was the editor who pulled Anne Frank's diary from the slush pile. She worked with novelists like Anne Tyler and John Updike, and more famously, she changed the way that people write about food and the kinds of cookbooks that were published, at least for a while. I think that's changed now. She worked with Madhur Jaffrey, with Edna Lewis, and most famously, of course, with Julia Child. I was a big fan of the HBO show Julia, so flawed, but still so watchable, where Jones was played by Fiona Glascott. So Jones wasn't a stranger to me, but oh my God, this is such a great book about work. And about publishing and books, but really about work. Jones took her job seriously. She didn't go to book parties or concern herself with the socializing part of publishing, but she did whatever she could to make the books she was editing as good as they could possibly be. She really cared about her authors. She, of course, surprise, surprise, wasn't properly appreciated, and she certainly wasn't adequately compensated for all that work. But after reading this book, I have no doubt that the subtitle, once again, How Publishing Legend Judith Jones Shaped Culture in America, is fully accurate. Just one of the great portrayals of dedication to work and culture and food. The next book I want to talk about is The Safekeep by Yael van der Voeten. Before I picked it up, I had seen some reviews, some coverage on YouTube that had mentioned that there are twists and surprises, and there absolutely are. I do not want to spoil anything because this is a book that, well, it's surprising, and that is weirdly rare these days. So just to say that it has some beautifully sprung twists and turns. It's very sexy, quite queer. And although I'm going to be very circumspect about the way I describe it, so as to avoid any possibility of spoilers, let me state absolutely clearly that it is very much worth reading. It's great. It's just fantastic. I can't believe it's a debut novel. I can't believe it's written by a non-native speaker, even a Dutch speaker, but it's great. Another October read that I was absolutely knocked out by is Dan Coyce's book, Hampton Heights. Before I go any further, I should disclose that I've known Dan for many years. We worked together at Slate. He was my editor for a while. And so I know that he's a great guy. It also turns out that he is, who knew, a great novelist. I really liked his first novel, Vintage Contemporaries, from 2023, which concerned itself with a topic that I'm more familiar with, or a setting that I had kind of lived in myself, which is to say, bookish young people who moved to New York City to live the life of the mind. I wasn't so sure about this book, which is about 6 paper boys on the cusp of young adulthood who find themselves in an unfamiliar Milwaukee neighborhood with newspaper subscriptions to sell. I have a very low tolerance for horror, which is to say that I'm a wimp, and the subtitle of this book is One Harrowing Night in the Most Haunted Neighborhood in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. If I hadn't known Dan, and if I hadn't loved Vintage Contemporaries, I think I would have dismissed this book as just something that wasn't for me. I am so glad that I didn't take that path. It's fantastic. I would say that rather than horror, it's more about magic, and specifically the kind of magical experience in that strange process by which we transform from children into something else. The boys pair off for their assignment, so there are basically 4 stories in the book, 3 for each pair of boys and 1 for their manager. Once again, I don't want to spoil, but I will say that one of the stories offers what could be seen as the origin story for queer relationships, and it is magnificent. I'm getting chills just thinking about it. Highly recommend. The last absolute banger of an October read was Our Evenings by Alan Hollingsworth. I listened to the audiobook, which was narrated by Prasanna Puraranaja, beautifully, I should say. The book is just beautifully written, but I think it spoke to me with a particular resonance because it follows the life of a biracial gay actor called Dave Wynn, and Dave, like Hollingsworth, is roughly the same age as me, a few years older actually, but we lived through the same eras, that brief period of meritocracy, the Thatcher years, and then after I headed off to the States, Tory triumphalism and Brexit, and well, whatever came or comes next. There are some things in the book that I've never seen in print before, kinds of relationships, levels of understanding, fine lines between exclusion and inclusion, insults meant as compliments. It's just outstanding. I'll be giving this to several people, not all gay, of around my age, and I suspect that it will speak to them with the same power and familiarity and authority that it spoke to me. Well, that was my reading for October 2024. Did you read any of those books? Did you read any other good books? If you have any thoughts or recommendations, or perhaps even questions about my book, A Place of Our Own, 6 Spaces That Shaped Queer Women's Culture, please ask them in the comments below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.